Okay, good morning, everybody. Where we left off on Monday was that we were working on some advanced surfacing techniques. But before I get started today, I'd like to know from all of you, do you have any questions for me about the toy assignment, finishing reboot if you haven't, anything at all? No? Okay. Okie doke. So where we left off is that I started with a very simple box. Okay. So let's go back to Modeler. And we can zoom in here just to see what I have. Just a simple six-sided box. And on one of the polys, I decided to, let's turn off move. I have move turned on. I decided to make the surface different so that I could go ahead and I could apply the texture map that I created of the window on here. Okay, and I put, just to show you that when I created a transparent map, I put a little ball inside that so you could see that and show that it is in fact transparent. So I'm going to switch back to layout. Now you'll notice from the other day, what I did is I added a little fill light, a little point light to the right here. Okay, so if you want to see that a little bit better, I'll take off VPR and we'll just look at wireframe. So if I move light properties over, you can see here's this little point light that I added. And if we look at the properties of the light, I turned the intensity of it, pretty low. It's a little over 1 lux, and that's about it. That's all that I felt I needed to blow a little bit of light into that shadow side of the box, just to illuminate it. So to get an idea of how that affects it, let me go back to VPR here so you can see what's going on. And now I can take from over here. And I also have fall off added. If I turned fall off, okay, then maybe that wouldn't be enough. But I added inverse, distance to that. Now, right now, if I cranked that up a little bit, okay, so instead of 1.12, that's kind of overkill, but just a little bit. So, 1.12 lux was really all that it needed, just to add a little bit of light to that side. So I have my distant light that I've used for my main light source. And I used a point light to pump a little bit of light in here. And when I do the demonstration today for lighting, one of the things that I wanted to show you is that if I don't want shadows cast by this object or by this light source, I can do that. Also, if I want to eliminate objects from this light source so that it's not affected, I can do that. So the other day, what I did too, in addition to that, is that in addition to the transparency, I added a bump map to the window panes. And so I want to show you how I did that. So let me turn off light properties here. Let's look at the surface editor. Okay. And again, let's go ahead and look at the window. And you can see that I have 4 different aspects of the surface that I've added. I added a bump map. I added a transparent map. That's what I did the other day. But also, if I turn off, I also added a reflection map. So right now, if I turn this off, if I hit Shift-T, you hardly see any reflective properties at all in that. So that has to be done a couple of different ways. We have to go to, I'm going to go ahead and I'll add that reflection map back in here. So I hit Key for reflection, okay? And then I have to specify what area in here do I want to be reflected. And I only want the window panes. If there was another element in here, I could add that. But right now, the window panes are the only thing that are really reflective inside my environment. So what I need to do, I'm going to leave the blending mode as normal for the moment. In fact, I can leave it that. But I'm going to go ahead, and the image that I'm going to use is going to be the window panes, which I've already used elsewhere. Now you can see it's really blowing out the rest of this. So if I invert it, notice that it only affects the window panes, and look at how reflective they are. By default, when it's set to 100%, it is like a mirror. But because I added that bump map that distorts it just a little bit, that in fact makes it kind of ripply, kind of like a funhouse mirror. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the properties, reflective properties down a little bit. And let's leave it maybe around 20%. Now, even with the reflection map added, it's possible that I wouldn't really see anything in there. Because what I need to do next is, right now I have materials selected, but we need, because we have this, our object is in an environment that's just black, nothing for it to reflect, that I created an artificial reflection. So if I go back over here to, I didn't want that. Let's go back to standard, I goofed. I need to go to shading model. And you can see right here where it says reflection, I twirled down on that and I wanted to add a glossy reflection. If I don't, then it's not quite so shiny. So it's up to you. But I made it kind of glossy, so it's reflective. And then what I want to add are the reflection options. By default, it has ray trace only. And when you do that, because there is nothing for it to reflect that black background, you don't see a reflection. Now, if I wanted a combination, I could do that. So if I wanted ray trace and a spherical map, I could do that. So for the reboot character, I could have used that, but since there isn't anything else in the background, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a spherical map only. So what that does is that it takes and it puts a big bubble around our environment, and we're inside that bubble, and what it does is it projects an image onto the inside of that bubble for it to reflect. So I picked from this river scene from inside our classic content, and it's under photographs. And you can see, you can't see the river, but what it does is it provides the blues and the greens and stuff for it to reflect inside that rippled glass that I created. So the other thing that we need to look at is that I said I added a bump map for the ripples. Well, again, I added a bump map to create a little drop shadow around the window frame, but I also added a bump map for the window panes as well. And that requires two separate layers for that. So if I turn off the window frame mask, then it just looks flat. When I turn that back on, that's at the bottom layer. It looks like it's, it pops out just a little bit. So the first one that I wanted to add was this one right here. And you'll notice this is set to alpha. It's planar because I only wanted the window panes to be affected. So we already used that one. It was the window panes JPEG. I changed the amplitude or left the amplitude to 1. If you wanted to exaggerate this, you could crank it up a little bit as I did for the window frame. But then if I turn off the alpha for that, you can see that what I added here was turbulence to create a bumpy kind of effect. And notice that it's applying it to everything, the entire side here. Well, I didn't want that. I needed to create a map, a layer mask, so that it would only target the window panes itself. So if I do that now, if I turn that back on, and we look at that, that in fact is the reversed, because I had to invert it in the window panes. So now what it's doing is it's targeting just the one down here, which is turbulence. And I changed the size of that. By default, it's 1 meter. It didn't need to be quite so big. So if I go back and I do that again, and I, use 1 meter, you can see that the ripples get a little bit bigger, but they're broader, so it's not quite as pronounced. And maybe that works even a little bit better, so it isn't quite so effective. Now I could also, right now the texture value was set to 80%. I could also drop that down to 40% maybe, and that could be just a little bit less. Okay. So maybe that works even a little bit better. I kind of like the exaggerated effect for our demonstration purposes. So I'm going to leave that to 80%. So you can really see the exaggerated ripples in the window panes. So I've added a reflection map. I added a bump map of this. This is a procedural, by the way. If you want to look and see what other procedurals look like, this is turbulence, but we have a whole bunch of them. If I wanted it to look like brick, I could make it look like brick. Now I'd obviously have to change the size of the brick. The kind of the go-to one for me though, for the procedural texture, I like using not ripples. I guess I could use ripples for it. That would work, and I'd have to change the size of that. But for many of the things that I use here, fractal noise works pretty good. But my favorite go-to is turbulence to drive that just a little bit. Okay. So I think that's pretty much it on creating, at least for the time being, creating more complex surfaces. I think I've covered it all. So I had a reflection map, a transparent map, a color map, which we used the image that I created in Photoshop, and we added a bump map. Okay, so those are all the maps that we added in order to take a simple box and to dress it up significantly. So for your toy assignment, that's sort of what I was thinking that you guys could do, is that you could take a very simple toy, and if that simple toy is simply made of plastic, is it transparent plastic? And if it is transparent, maybe it has reflective properties that you could add. Does the company that made the toy have a logo that you want to put on the side of it, a sticker of some sort? That would be a way of doing that. And is it a shiny sticker, or it is a flat two-dimensional one? Is it embossed? Is it, it can be done any number of different ways. So that's what I had in store for that. So let me make sure that all of this is saved, and then we're going to switch to lighting, and that's where we'll finish up today, because that is another important aspect of really taking a simple object and dressing it up and making it look more believable, making it look real. So I've taken, like I say, a simple box and made it look like it's made of wood and had transparent glass and rippled glass and reflective properties and stuff. So now what we're going to do is we're going to play with lighting and the different kinds of lighting that you can use. So I got to make sure that all of this is saved. So I'm going to go ahead and save the scene. So I still have that saved. And I got to make sure that I save all objects. Make sure that that's saved, any changes that I've made to it. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clear the scene. Okay. And I'm going to go back to Modeler. And I'm going to switch. And this morning I made this a little simple still life. So if we look at the still life here, it's just, you know, one that you would, whoops, wrong key. I want to make sure that all of these layers are turned on. There we go. I'll go hit A to fit all. And you can see in here, I just made a simple still life. Okay. Maybe I'll take this layer and move it forward. No, I'll just leave it right there. Okay. So now we're going to play with different kinds of lighting and layout. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this is synchronized. And then I'm going to send object to layout. Now I made this as one object, but each of these primitives exist on their own layer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send object to layout. And there we go. Now you can see off the bat, I have a distant light and I have an environment light. Okay, I can move the environment light pretty much wherever I want, okay, to affect my overall scene. So before I do anything else though, since I'm in camera view, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move the camera closer. So with camera selected, I'm going to hit T for move it forward like so. Then I'm going to move it up like so. And then I'm going to rotate it so that it's down like so. Now you can barely see the background there. But as soon as I switch from texture shaded and I go to VPR, notice the difference. Now this is what the environment light, to a large extent, has an effect on us right now. That if this were for an outdoor scene, we have our shadows, we have our distant light, and we have the default setting for an environment light. So it would be a nice, bright, shining day with a blue cast over all of our objects. Now, since we're starting with the default distant light, that's what I want to talk about first. And I want you to pay close attention to the shadows, okay? The shadows with distant lights by default are really crisp, but they can be changed, and that is something new. In the past, you couldn't do that because you can change the diameter of the size of that distant light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to light properties, select the properties panel, bring that up. You can see that the current light that we have selected right now is in the environment. So I'm going to switch up here where it says environment light in the upper right hand corner, and I'm going to select our regular light to see what we have here. Now by default, in the sun, since a distant light is sort of equivalent to the sun, you can't have any fall off. It's a constant intensity. And the default intensity for any light is 3.14 lux. How that translates, I don't know. It's something that happened, I think, in the 2018 version of LightWave. But it's a term in a way of calculating the intensity of light that's used in photography. Okay. Now, at the bottom here, I can change for this. I can change the distance and I can change the angle. If I change the angle and I drag this up, oh, let's make it larger. Notice that my shadows have gotten softer. So depending on the kind of setting that you're working with, you know, typically really crisp shadows look a little bit artificial. And when you add a little bit of softness to the edges to them, they look a little bit more believable or a little bit more inviting. Now, the other thing that I want to show you with distant lights And I'll switch from current camera to perspective to show you what happens here. And I'm going to turn off VPR for a second so that I just have textured solid here. And then I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see how the lighting affects this. Now, if I select the light itself and I move the light back like so, notice that it doesn't change the direction of the light or the shadow side. Not at all. If I move it to the right, it doesn't affect it. If I move it to the left, it doesn't affect it either. Because distant lights, as I said, since they're like having, using the sun as a light source, the sun is so large in relationship to the earth that it's just like one big wall of light. Where it will change the direction of the shadows is that when I use rotate. So now if I rotate the light, notice that I've changed the direction of my shadows. Like so. Does everybody see that? So that's important. Changing both the direction of the light source and the direction of my shadows. Hold on one second here, folks. Sorry for the interruption. Anyway, I'm back. So the next thing, let's go ahead and swap out and change some different lights and see what they do. So to do that, and to see all the different kinds of lights that we have, the current light is by default set to distant, that's what I said. You can add an ambient light, and typically ambient lights are used like environment lights, but they're used for the interiors of rooms. An ambient light, what that does, if I change that to an ambient light, is that notice it says that its light intensity is over 100%. That's a bit much. And it just whitens everything out. Ambient light is the light that is in a room, even when you don't have any lights. If you were to turn out or close all of your windows, window shades, and everything else, light would penetrate somewhere. So if I were to change this, and typically you don't want any more than 5% for ambient light, no more than that. And even if I switched back to VPR, look at how bright all of this is going to be. Okay. So if you feel you need ambient light, a little bit of light that bathes over everything, we can go ahead and we can add that. And notice how the shadows, in fact, are affected by everything. So that's an ambient light. Let me go ahead and I'll leave perspective turned on. But no, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to camera view, just so you can see that a little bit better. Okay, so you can see without really doing much, we're really dramatically affecting the overall, our overall scene and how the appearance of our objects here. So that's what an ambient light does. It's kind of bathes the whole scene in light. And if I wanted to, I could turn off the environment light and I could change the color of the light. So if you want to change the color for any of the lights, you click on this little button right here. And let's say I wanted it to be, you know, like the sun or something. I wanted it to be kind of yellow. So if I click that, I really don't see much of a change. How about if I change it to a really kind of a nice bright red? Let's see how that affects everything. Yeah, notice how there's a little bit of a reddish tinge to everything now. Not much, but again, I said if I turned off the environmental light, then you would see that. So I'm going to go back to white. So that's what ambient light does. So the next one we can do is we can switch that one to an area light. And when I switch to an area light, it has much softer shadows than what we've had before. And also it's a little bit less intense than what we've used before. So I'm going to switch again from VPR back to textured shaded. Actually, I'm going to go back to a wireframe, I think. And I'm going to go, yeah, I'll leave it texture shaded solid. But I'm going to switch back from camera view to perspective view, so you can see that. And I want you to see what it looks like. If I zoom in here, you can see this little icon right here. This, in fact, is this little square is an image for an area light. And what an area light is an array of linear lights. There are 4 linear lights that make up an area light. And a linear light, which we will get to shortly, is kind of like a fluorescent tube. A linear light is comprised of 4 point lights. So it gives you kind of a nice flat wall of light. But again, what we want to do is, if we want to see how this is affecting us, and we want to switch back to VPR. And right now, the intensity of this is really low. So I'm going to go back to the default 3.14 lux. Okay. And also notice that I have intensity fall off. Now, if I turn that off, look at how much brighter it's going to be. Really not a whole lot. So what I could do is, let's go ahead and let's crank that up. I'm going to really exaggerate that at 12. And you can see that area lights don't have as much of an impact on your scene as others, but they're usually used quite extensively on the interiors of rooms. Okay. But again, notice how prominent now the reflections are, how soft the shadows are. That's also another aspect of linear lights, or rather area lights. So while I have this one selected, I'm going to switch from that. We have area. Let's switch to linear. And I'm going to go back to, instead of VPR, I'm going to look at texture solid so we can look at that. And now you can look at the little icon here, or the graphic representation of that light. And it's just this long linear tube. And as I said, linear lights are comprised of 4 point lights. Okay, and then the area lights are comprised of an array of 4 linear lights. So if you're creating an interior of a room and you want to, that room uses fluorescent lights, you would probably want to use linear lights. And again, if we go back to VPR again, okay, the shadows again are pretty soft. I should probably go back to the environment light, and I'm going to turn it down. So instead of 100%, I'm going to make it 10%, so you can really see the effect that environment light is having on everything. So in a heartbeat, I could turn a day scene into a night scene if I wanted to. Okay, now it looks like this is at the nighttime. So environment lights are new to 2020. And they have a huge impact on our scene. Okay. So I'm going to go back to 100%. So how that affects everything right now. But I'm going to switch again from VPR perspective to camera view, so we can see this a little better. Now you can see, notice that the light side here is dramatically affected. Okay, so if I want, pretend that we have, for example, a light source coming from an individual light, like a window that could be coming from out of doors. And notice how that highlights and enhances the view of the forms that I've created here. And again, for a linear light, look at the shadows. Because of the direction and the placement of the light, they're much more elongated now. The edges are much crisper than what they were before. Okay, so that's a linear light. So let's switch from the environment back to the light source again. And instead of a linear light, I'm going to use an n-gon is if you want to take a polygon and turn it into a light source. You can use something called photometric lighting. In photometric lighting, we would have to import a light for this. But I can show you something that I've done in one of my own pieces. They're called Ies Lights, and they simulate the geometry of real lights. And so what I have done, let me switch over here and bring up Photoshop. And I don't know if you guys can see that, and I don't think you can. So I'm going to move that up, and I'm going to move this back. There we go. Let me move this down. There we go. So this, what I'm doing in here is I'm creating a virtual gallery. And you'll notice that I have all of these spotlights here. And they have a very specific throw. Okay, the ones that I'm using here are rounded, but there is a whole bunch of different kinds of Ies lights that, again, as I said, simulate exactly the kind of lights that maybe you're looking for. And you can find those online. So let me find those real quick. I think I had them up here, but maybe not. So I'm going to go ahead here for a minute, and I'm going to look them up real quick so you can see them yourself. Okay, so that's what photometric lights are. I put IES. It's Illuminating Engineering Society. Okay. And let's go ahead and let's bring this down here, like so. And let's look at Ies Lights. See if we can find some samples of them. Yeah, here they are. So if we look at Ies Lighting, you can see in here, if I click on this, to look at all these different types of lights, you can download these lights for free to give, very specific, have very specific lighting effects. And, all different lights do just that, depending on their intensity, depending on their shape, on the throw that they kind of have. It will in fact affect your environment tremendously depending on the kind of Ies lighting that you use. So I used rounded spotlight for my gallery, and also for the main scene, I used, what was it? Was it kind of a generic light that you would use for that? I don't remember the specific name of it. But anyway, that's where you find those. And to do that, you have to download them, and then you can load the file like so. And then you'd have to go in and find it. And I have mine on my computer somewhere, but that's what you would do. You would load it in there. And that's used pretty frequently for individual little spotlights like I have in my gallery. You can also find them for particular task lights or for wall lights or things like that. If you're creating architectural environments, that's where you find them most. So that's what a photometric light is. Point light we've used. Okay, and notice how intense that is at 12K. Again, it's really illuminating the side, but also look at the shadows. The shadows from point lights are very, very crisp. So again, depending on the effect that you're going for will determine the kind of light that you choose. Now, if I were to go back to my other scene and use that point light, one of the things that we can do, and I think what I've had this turned on, is that right now is that I have volumetric lighting turned on, and we can really crank that up if we want to. But I want to play with that in a minute and show how we can affect our scene that way. But notice how all of these lights, the different lights, give sometimes dramatically different effects and sometimes very subtle changes in effect. Most importantly, notice the shadows and the direction of the shadows. As I said, the only light that you would use that moving the light doesn't affect the direction of the shadow is a distant light. But all the rest of these, if I move them around, it will dramatically affect the direction of the light and also the distance of the light, as well as if I have intensity fall off. Right now it's turned off. If I turn that back on, notice how much more subtle it is. Okay, so this is with the fall off. And this, gives you a more accurate, for environments, a more accurate description of the intensity of the light. 12 lux light may be very intense, but it doesn't have that much of a throw. It doesn't have impact lights from a distance, or objects from a distance, I should say. So I'll go ahead and turn that back off and brighten that up a bit. So that's our point light. And our point light is nothing more, if you look at the icon of that. Let's go back to shaded solid, and let's zoom out a little bit. Instead of camera view, let's look at perspective view. And you can see here is this little ball of light here, okay, that's affecting it. And again, if I rotate this light, it won't have an effect. But if I move the light, it will. Notice that the shadows and the intensity, change dramatically as I move that around. The direction of the light. Like so. So let's go back and see how I messed up my scene. Let's go back to camera, and let's go back to VPR and see what we have. Notice how it's really dramatically affecting everything right now. And again, that's with an intensity fall off turned off. If I turn it back on, again, we have an environment light that we're using. So that too is affecting everything pretty dramatically. So that's a point light. It's just a little ball of light that are very good for fill lights, but so are some of the others that you can use. And I encourage you to play with some of these. Primitive lights I've never used, that's relatively new. Spherical lights I have used. Spherical lights are a combination of point lights and distant lights. They're a big ball of light is what they are. So I'm going to go back to the light that we're using right here. I'm going to turn off volumetric light for a second here and turn the intensity down to maybe 10%. And then we're going to come back to, from environment, just to look at this light. And you can see that it seems to have hardly any effect at all on here. But if I turn off inverse distance, I turn that back on, notice that it has a pretty sharp effect on my scene now by turning off the fall off. And again, depending on the direction of the light, the placement of the light will determine the direction of the shadows. And by default, they look a lot, looks a lot like a distant light, very crisp shadows. But as I change the size of it, so let's change it all the way up from 100 millimeters to 1 meter. And now you'll notice by changing the size of that, it dramatically affects the quality of the shadows. They're much softer now. Okay. Now, I'll also say affect volumetrics. If I want, I can turn that off like so. And it's also, it's visible to the camera. Maybe it isn't. I thought it was. Let's turn off affect specular and see what that affects. See how that, the little dot in the left-hand corner, not little, it's quite significant. That's a result of a specular highlight that's created from the light. So sometimes when you're seeing some of those things, you have to turn off the effect to get the desired look that you're going for. If you want it to not affect diffuse, then everything goes black. If you want it to not affect OpenGL, then also everything sometimes will go black. If you want to add a lens flare, you can. You can also add an image to this, which we're going to do for a spotlight in a minute. Okay, so let me make it visible to the camera, and you can see this is the light over here. So if I actually want to see it, it's visible. If I don't, I turn that off. If I want it to affect specular highlights, then I would do that. Okay, so all these different ways of affecting, number one, using different lights and all the different properties of those lights that you can adjust and change depending on what kind of look you're going for. And again, let me go ahead and change the placement of that light just to see what this looks like. So I'm going to go back to top view. And instead of back here, let's go ahead and select the light. And I'm going to switch from VPR to wireframe just so that I can see this a little bit better. And I'm going to switch to move. Key to move. Just one big ball of light. So maybe if I want the shadows to go more towards the back of the scene, then I would have to move the light source. And that's true for the others as well. And now I can go back to camera view. And let's go back to, and you can see that I've changed the size of that. But as I'm looking at this, as I said, it's just one big ball of light. And as you affect the size, it will affect the shadows. So let's switch from wireframe back to VPR. Okay, so again, now I can see that light source. Maybe I don't want to see that. So if I say, visible to camera, no, I want to turn that off. And now maybe if I want it says affect volumetrics, maybe I want to turn that off. Maybe I also want to affect specular and turn that off. You can see the huge hot spot it has on here. So that's wrong. That's really, really too much. So let's turn off, follow off back on. And maybe I need to crank this up a bit. So let's make this 24 lux. So maybe if I want a very subtle evening or, dark scene, then I can do that with really subtle shadows and illumination. And you can see how it affects the foreground. But, you can take a very simple, as I said, a simple object or simple still life like what I have and affect the scene dramatically just through the, changing the lights, the intensity of the lights, their fall off or no fall off, and you want an environment light, and on and on and on. I think the best example of that, and usually when I'm in class with students, I ask them if they've been to Disneyland and they've ever seen a dark ride with the lights turned on, and you see what it looks like without the, during the daytime, without the effects of the lighting. It doesn't look all that spectacular, to be quite honest. It looks pretty strange. And it's all done, all of the special effects that you see in those dark rides are done through dramatic lighting. So the point of me with this demonstration is to show you how you can make a very simple scene, a very simple object look quite elegant, put it in a setting that has ambiance, that has, where you get a really strong sense of a more expansive environment than you would by just relying on the default light source itself. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's try some other lights. So that was a spherical light. Let's do the spotlight. And here's our spotlight. okay? Now, a spotlight is a cone of light, and that can be affected in a number of ways. You can come down here at the bottom, and you can change the angle of the light. The default is 30 degrees. So if I want it a wider light, I can change it like so. I'm going to leave it at 30 for a second, the default setting. And I can also change the soft angle. And you can see that it has quite a softness to it, you know, 5 degrees. Now, if I turn that off, I get a really sharp edge. And I don't use that often. But if you want a really soft edge, then you can really crank it up. And now it's really, really soft. Okay, I'm going to go back to the default 5 degrees. I like that setting for right now. Now, some of the other things that you can do with some of the lights and some of the lights you can't is right now, if I turn on volumetrics, you don't see anything. That's because I have inverse. Let's go ahead and affect specular. Let's say visible to camera so that we turn that on. Let me come down here and see what we have for volumetric intensity is 100%. So I should be able to see everything that I'm not seeing at the moment. How about if I turn off inverse and see if I see it now? No, it's just way too bright. So I'm going to turn that back off. I had this working a little bit earlier. So I'm going to change that. We have the volumetric intensity set to 100%. And where you also change this, and I may not have edited this yet, is that we have to go into render properties here. And under volumetrics, we have to say enable volumetrics. The indirect intensity will be set to 100% for right now. And then I have to go back to global illumination. And I'm going to, well, if I say, all I need is that, let's say affected by volumetrics. Let's go ahead and turn that on. And let's go back to render. And where else can I change this? Noise filter, I'm gonna turn that on. Let's go back to volumetrics here for a minute. Use backdrop, unseen by camera, indirect sampling, see if that affects anything. No. Enable volumetrics. I could have turned that on. There we go. Let's turn that on. So that should help. Let's go back to global illumination. I need to turn on brute force affected by volumetrics. I'm turning all of these on to make sure that we have it. And there's one that I'm missing here that I'm let's turn that on just for the heck of it. General. You know what? Let me turn all of this. I'm going to change this from a spotlight to, well, let me try something else for a moment. The spotlight is the only thing that you can project images on, or from, I should say. And that can be pretty interesting. For example, what if you want to create the illusion that light is coming through a window, but in fact, you don't have a window that you've created. So what I can do down here with the spotlight is that I can select from down here, I can say I can use a projection image. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to load the image. And I'm going to take that window panes that we got from our image here. And you can see that it's the panes that are blocked, but the light's coming everywhere else. So what I need to do is I need to invert that. So I'm going to go back to the window panes. Let's bring up I want the image editor, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to take the window panes and I need to invert it just like we had done before. So I'm going to take it, real auto, manual. Come on. Dithering, interlace. Why can't I invert it from here? Here we go. So I need to be able to invert this. And it's not allowing me to invert it. There should be an invert somewhere here. But that's what I want to do. Let me click on here. Well, I might have to open it back up and invert it. Let's try a different one just for the heck of it. Let's try a different image. And you can use this like a projector. And we can load any kind of image in here. So for example, the sandbar image that I used from before, I could use that and project that onto my scene. And you can see that the light is functioning like a projector and projecting onto my scene here. So in order to get my window pane to work the way I want it, I would have to invert this. So while I have this here, maybe I can invert this from here. Why can't I invert it? I'm not finding where I can invert it. Anyway, that's what I have to do, and it would look like that. So how are we doing on time? We're kind of short. So let me try that one last thing. So I'm going to open that back up in Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and select Photoshop. And I'm going to open that image. Just to show you what I can do here, I'm going to go ahead and open the scene. Come on. I want to get this done, get it done. And I need to go back to my desktop. And I need to look into our scenes here that we created for this class. Okay. That's not it. Where are we here? Oh, shoot. There it is, content. Looking right at it. And let's look at images, or not images, yeah, images. And I'm going to open up the window panes, okay, in Photoshop. And I'm going to invert it. So that's Command I to invert. That's exactly what I want. Now I'm going to save this as a JPEG. Again. And I'm going to rename this invert so I know which one it is. Okay. So I've just inverted it inside Photoshop here. And I probably can do it, invert it inside LightWave as well, but for some reason I'm not finding it at the moment. Okay, so let's go back again and let's close this and let's change my image. So instead of the sandbar image, I'm going to load the other one. And I want the inverted JPEG. And open it up. And there you go. So now it looks like light is only coming through the windows. And if I want to change the color of the light, let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and I have a spot. So if I want it to look like it's an evening light and it's, you know, have some bluish light coming through, I got that. And I wish Volumetrics is working for me. So we're running close end of time anyway. And I'm not sure why it's not working for us, but at the moment, but I will fix it for next time. Excuse me. So the spot, how about if I were to change the size of it? Okay, that's not affecting it. Spot 2. No, it's not. Volumetrics isn't showing. And I'm not sure why at the moment. Because I had it working a moment ago for another scene that I was working on. So there's something I'm clearly forgetting. And I thought it was because I didn't have intensity fall off selected. And that was why I couldn't see it. Notice how dramatic it affects all of that when you have fall off selected. So there you have it for one day. I finished up our advanced surfacing techniques, and I went through most of the lights here, and I encourage you to play with them. I will continue with this on Monday a little bit because there is something that I do want to show you. I think I have a couple minutes left here. I'm going to go ahead and save this scene, but I will continue it as. I'm going to save scene as. I'm going to call it lighting demo. Okay. And I want to save all objects. Okay, now I can clear the scene. So let's go ahead and clear my scene. And I'm going to load one. And this is available in classic content. And it's found in the blotchy folder that you can download. So if I go ahead and I load this scene, and I've already copied it, and it's called Light Stage. It's really good for products. Let me go, and I have to open up my bowl, my ground bowl. So why don't I have my ground bowl object here? Let's go back to objects. Oh, I have to pick an empty folder. Oh, I forgot. Let's just pick a new folder here, because this is from an older version. Okay, so that doesn't look like much. But if you look at this, instead of camera view, if we switch from camera view to perspective view, you can see that I have a whole slew of lights, and I have this, what's called a ground bowl here. So it's basically taking a stage with coved corners, so you don't see the corners, and you don't see an end to it. But you'll notice if we look at the top here, you can look at all the lights that we have here. Here's our top light. Here's a key light that is right there. And then it tells you all the different kinds of lights. It's an area light. We actually have 2 key lights. Okay, so we have a top light that is an area light. We have a key light. We also have a fill light over here. And that is, they use the distant light for that. I probably wouldn't have, but that's okay. And then we can go back up here again, and then we have a backlight. That's a point light, or no, they use a spotlight for that, okay. And then we have our key 2 light here, which is a spotlight. So this sets everything up quite nicely. So what I could do here is I could go ahead and inside my scene, I could go ahead and I could load my object. So if I already have my object done, and if this doesn't work today, let's go inside objects. I need to go back into my other folder here. So let's go back to the desktop. Let's look in fall, where is it? My content here. I go on my objects. I want to, why won't it let me import? Oh, I don't want to load a scene. What am I thinking here? I'm sorry. I want to load an object. So load object, that's what I want to do. There we go. So I'm going to come back to Content Fall 2020. I'm going to go to Objects. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring in my LightWave character. Or not LightWave, my reboot character. Okay, so he's in there. He's very teeny tiny, but remember, we don't know the scale of him or anything else because it's kind of a neutral background. And I can switch to camera view. There we go. So I can leave that like that, or I can enlarge him. So let's go ahead and take him while he's selected and go to modify. And let's go ahead and size him. Let's go ahead and make him bigger, like so. Let's move him up like so. And I probably want to look at this from the side view so I could see everything, make sure he's on the ground, or if I wanted him floating in midair, I could have him do that. And now let's look at this instead of shaded view. We can look at this in VPR and see kind of the lighting that we have here. Okay. Now, for whatever reason, the light bowl is not showing here. So this would be good for another day since I've already used up some time, and I'll get this fixed and show you how to do that. I was hoping I could get this done by the end of today. So right now we have projection none, How about intensity, key light? Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and tweak this a little bit. And I might have to change the intensity of the lights and that sort of thing. Since this was actually from an older version, let's start with our key light, spotlight, and we have, let's change that to 3.14 lux and brighten that up. Let's go back to our key light, one area light, and let's crank that up to maybe 12 lux. Let's also, just one at a time, you have to start to, let's take the fill light, let's double that maybe a little bit, 3 lux. And, gradually getting all of this to work because it is from an older version. We need to crank this up. So this would be 2 lux. Okay. Let's turn that on. And gradually we're getting some nice lighting for him. So that's where I wanted to end this today, and I'll finish this up for another day. Okay, so if you guys have to go ahead and go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop recording now. And you guys are welcome to leave unless you have any questions. Okay, so goodbye for now. You guys are welcome to leave. I'll stop the recording and I'll post this within an hour or so. According to this, so you can go through all the lights yourself, and to finish up the lesson on advanced surfacing.